Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive.
It's really great to be here. We've got, I think, a really compelling topic lined up for you today.
Absolutely. Today, we're diving deep, really plunging into one of those things that affects so many of us, the fascinating science behind how we actually learn a new language effectively.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, many of you listening have probably wrestled with this, right? Whether you're trying to get your English up to scratch for work or maybe connect with a new culture.
Or just curious. Sometimes it's just pure curiosity.
Exactly, driven by that need to understand.
That's right. And, the whole language learning thing, it often feels like trying to find your way in a fog. There are so many methods, so many debates about the best way.
So much conflicting advice out there.
Precisely. So our mission today is really to try and cut through some of that noise, maybe shine a light on the path. We've spent a lot of time digging into decades of academic research on language acquisition.
Pulling out the core ideas.
Yeah, pulling out what really matters, the crucial insights. And some of them are actually quite surprising.
So, get ready. We're going to unpack what the science says actually moves the needle. Hopefully you'll understand the foundational principles better and maybe get a clearer research-backed view on your own language learning journey.
By the end of this, the aim is for you to have a kind of roadmap, a clearer path to becoming a more effective and maybe even a more joyful language learner.
Okay, let's unpack this. So I guess the big question, the one that always seems to come up first, is there one single magic bullet best way to learn a language? Or is it, a bit more complicated than that?
Well, what the research seems to tell us pretty emphatically, actually, is that no, there isn't one single magic method that works perfectly for everyone every time.
Okay, that's sort of what I expected, but good to have it confirmed.
But, and this is the important part, there are definitely core principles that consistently show up as being effective. And the biggest insight, it sounds almost too simple, but it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
The most effective way for you is probably going to be the one you actually enjoy doing, the one you're motivated to stick with.
Ah, enjoyment. Okay.
Because enjoyment fuels consistency. It fuels the time and practice needed. You can have the most theoretically perfect method, but if you hate doing it, you just won't.
Right. You'll find excuses not to.
Exactly. If you're happy doing it, you'll put in the hours without it feeling like a chore.
That makes total sense. And it immediately brings to mind people like Steve Kaufman, the polyglot. He's quite well known for his approach.
The comprehensible input model, yeah.
Right. Consuming vast amounts of interesting material, mostly listening and reading, stuff that's just slightly challenging, but you can still follow it.
Rather than just drilling grammar rules in isolation.
Exactly. And the question always is he just, some kind of linguistic genius, an exception? Or can anyone actually adopt elements of that approach successfully?
That's the kind of debate we want the research to help us navigate. What does the academic work tell us about these kinds of principles, these universal ideas, and how could they apply to you? Maybe you're learning English right now with your own background, your own reasons for learning.
Okay, so the research we looked at really starts by tackling some pretty fundamental questions, the kind linguists and educators have been chewing over for years.
Foundational stuff, yeah.
One of the first big ones is the difference between learning your first language, as a baby, and learning a second language later on. What does the science say about that distinction?
Yeah, that's a really critical place to start because when we learn our first language as kids, it's almost effortless, isn't it? Though our parents might disagree.
Sure.
But it's organic. It's trial and error. Think about how kids say things like, I God, before they figure out went.
Right. They overgeneralize the rules.
Exactly. It's this long, natural process, deeply, deeply tied into just communicating, surviving, being in the world. Second language learning, though, especially for us adults, it's usually much more active, conscious.
You have to decide to do it.
You have to decide. Often it starts in a formal place, like a school, or through deliberate effort, like using an app or taking lessons. And importantly, our brains already have these established pathways for our native language. Learning a new one means navigating around or building on top of that existing structure. It's just a different process.
That really frames the challenge differently, doesn't it? Okay, building on that, what about this idea of a knack? We all seem to know someone who just picks up languages like they're collecting stamps, while others really, really struggle, maybe even give up.
Ah, the knack question.
Is it real? Is it innate talent? Genetics?
Well, the research suggests it's way more complex than just talent. Yes, maybe some slight predispositions exist, perhaps Growing up multilingual gives you a bit of an edge, or maybe there are subtle genetic factors we don't fully understand yet.
Yeah.
But the studies really emphasize that things like your attitude, your motivation, and crucially, your approach seem to be far, far more significant predictors of success.
Okay, so it's less about innate ability and more about how you go about it.
Largely, yes. Think about Steve Kaufman again. His whole philosophy seems to be very no stress, almost leisurely, focusing on enjoyment. He's clearly passionate about it. It's not just a means to an end.
Right, it's a lifelong pursuit for him.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with someone who's desperately trying to cram a language, maybe for an exam or a job requirement. They see it as just a commodity, a box to tick. For them, it can feel like this huge, stressful burden.
And that stress probably hinders learning.
Absolutely. That internal landscape, your motivation, your anxiety levels, your beliefs about your own ability, it has a huge impact. Attitude might trump aptitude in many cases.
Okay, this is fascinating. Now, here's one that gets debated all the time. Age. How much does age really matter? The common wisdom, what everyone says is, learn when you're young, the earlier the better. Is that actually true?
The age question.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely much more nuanced than just earlier is always better.
Okay.
While yes, early exposure can offer some advantages, particularly with achieving native-like pronunciation, kids' brains seem more plastic for certain sounds.
But there's a but.
There's a big but. Older learners bring some incredibly valuable assets to the table that kids don't have. Things like, well, life experience.
Right, context for understanding things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And developed cognitive strategies. Adults can consciously apply learning techniques, memory tricks, analytical skills. We have a better abstract understanding of how language works, generally. We know what a verb is, what a noun is.
We have metalinguistic awareness.
Precisely. Kids learn implicitly, soaking it up. Adults can learn explicitly and implicitly. And the research points to plenty of examples, like Kaufman again, learning very effectively well into his 70s.
So it's not just that age doesn't have to be a barrier.
It's that maturity can actually be an advantage if you leverage those adult strengths. It's about using the right tools for the job at different ages.
That's a much more empowering perspective. Okay, what about learning styles? This comes up a lot too. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I'm a visual learner, so I need flashcards. Does tailoring your approach to your supposed style actually make a big difference?
Yeah, this is another area where the popular idea doesn't quite match the rigorous research. The whole concept of distinct, fixed learning styles, like being only a visual learner. It's actually been largely contested, even debunked by quite a lot of research. There's very little solid evidence showing that teaching specifically to someone's self-reported style significantly improves their learning outcomes.
Oh, really? That's surprising, because you hear it everywhere.
That's a very persistent idea.
Yeah.
But the underlying principle, the idea that different people do learn effectively in different ways, that still holds true. Absolutely.
Okay, so the labels might be wrong, but the variety is real.
Exactly. It's not about rigidly sticking to, I'm a visual learner, I only learn from pictures. It's more about being flexible, trying different things, listening, reading, speaking, writing, using apps, talking to people, watching movies, and figuring out which blend of activities genuinely helps you understand and remember best.
So experimentation is key, not self-labeling.
Precisely. Keep an open mind, see what clicks for you, and don't feel constrained by a label that might not even be accurate.
Got it. Okay, this next one feels like it's at the heart of a lot of methods. Should you be consciously studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists? Or can you just sort of soak it all up like a sponge through pure immersion?
The grammar debate. Explicit versus implicit learning.
Yeah. Where does the research land on this?
It really seems to suggest it's a bit of both, a kind of yin and yang, a balance.
Not one or the other.
Not purely one or the other for most adult learners. Immersion and getting tons of comprehensible input are incredibly powerful. That's how we learned our first language, after all.
Yeah.
But even when we learned our L1, we eventually had some conscious learning, didn't we? Like learning to read and write in school, being corrected on grammar.
True. We get explicit instruction eventually.
Right. So for second language learners, especially adults, combining that rich, natural interaction and input with some focused attention on specific bits, maybe noticing a particular grammar structure, or deliberately learning key vocabulary that seems to be very effective.
So noticing patterns while you're using the language.
Exactly. It's not necessarily about studying grammar rules in a textbook for hours in isolation. It's more about developing an awareness of how the language works through meaningful use, perhaps with some targeted explanations or practice sprinkled in when needed. finding that sweet spot.
Okay. And finally, in this section of foundational questions, how does our first language, our mother tongue, influence how we learn a second one? Is it just about struggling with pronunciation, or is it deeper than that?
Oh, it's massive. Absolutely massive. The influence of your first language, L1, on learning a second, L2, is probably one of the biggest factors.
In what ways?
Well, pronunciation is the obvious one. The sounds in your L1 train your ear and mouth in certain ways, making it harder to hear or produce sounds that don't exist in your native language.
Like the sound for many learners of English.
Exactly, or the oral distinction for Japanese speakers. But it goes much deeper. The research consistently shows that a huge majority of the grammatical errors L2 learners make can be traced directly back to the structures and patterns of their first language.
You mean like translating word for word?
Sometimes it's direct translation, yeah. Like a French speaker saying, I am agree, because in French it's je suis d'accord. Literally, I am agree. But it's also about deeper grammatical habits. Maybe your L1 doesn't use articles like a and the in the same way English does, so you keep forgetting them, or word order is different.
So your L1 creates a sort of blueprint, and you try to fit the L2 into it.
That's a great way to put it. Your L1 carves these deep grooves in your brain, and the new language tries to follow those paths, even when they lead to errors in the L2, and
Yep.
beyond just the grammar and sounds.
There's more.
Yeah, even your native culture's typical approach to learning can influence you. Some educational cultures might heavily emphasize rote memorization and translation, for instance, which might not always be the most effective strategy for developing real communicative fluency. So the L1's influence is linguistic, cognitive, and cultural. It's huge. Okay, so before we jump into the sort of core strategies that the research points towards,
Right.
it's probably useful to define what we mean by an everyday language learner and maybe what success actually looks like.
Good point. Because success can mean different things to different people. So who is this everyday language learner we're talking about?
Typically, it's an adult, someone who probably started learning, say, in high school or maybe even later in life. And their goal isn't necessarily academic linguistics, it's long-term practical fluency.
Right. Being able to actually use the language. Which brings us to success. It's not just about passing a test, is it?
Not at all. The research really defines success in practical terms. It's about being able to use the language, let's say English, for example, for effective real communication.
In different situations.
Exactly. Across a whole wide range of situations and settings, it means being able to adapt your English, whether you're talking to family, your boss, your friends, a doctor.
Different people, different levels of formality.
Precisely. And across different formats, too.
Right.
Writing a professional email versus sending a quick text versus having a face-to-face chat or making a phone call.
Okay, and using it in different places, home, work, school.
Right.
Yeah.
But crucially, it's about using English as a tool, as a vehicle to actually do things, to achieve your goals.
Like what?
Like persuading someone,
Mm-hmm.
telling a joke, reporting information, giving instructions, expressing sympathy. All the things you do naturally, intuitively, in your first language. Success is being able to perform those communication actions effectively in your new language.
So it's about functional competence, really, what you can do with it.
That's the key, what you can do.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned all this research, decades of it. But often when you try to read those academic papers, they can be, well, pretty dense, full of jargon.
Oh, absolutely. They're often not written with the everyday learner directly in mind.
They're not usually simple how-to guides.
No, much of the research is focused more on understanding the underlying processes. What's actually happening in our brains when we learn. How does social interaction affect acquisition? The deep mechanics of it all.
So where do practical strategies come in?
Well, researchers like Andrew Cohen talk about language learning strategies. And these are essentially the specific things learners consciously choose to do to help themselves learn or use the language.
Like what kind of things?
Things like figuring out how to fit study time into a busy schedule, techniques for memorizing vocabulary, ways to monitor your own progress, or strategies for keeping yourself motivated. They're the conscious thoughts and actions learners employ.
Okay, so the deep research informs our understanding of the process, and then strategies are the actions we take based on that understanding.
Exactly. The research gives us the why and the how it works, and that helps us choose better what to do.
Right. Okay, so now we're getting to the real core of it. After looking at all that research, what does it all boil down to? You mentioned 3 key points, a kind of trifecta for effective learning.
That's right. Synthesizing across many studies, 3 fundamental principles really stand out. They might sound, almost obvious at first glance.
But they're backed by solid evidence.
They're profoundly backed by evidence.
Okay,
Okay, ready for number one?
let's have it.
First, learn the language in context.
In context. What does that mean exactly? Not just words on a page.
Precisely. It means seeing language not just as a collection of rules and words to be memorized, but as a living, breathing social practice. Something you do, something you experience with other people.
Okay.
Language is always embedded in social situations and cultural practices. So instead of just memorizing abstract grammar rules like, the past participle of to be, you engage with materials that show the language being used in real-world ways.
Like what kind of materials?
Authentic things. Real emails, actual conversations between people, engaging stories, news articles, movies, songs. Situations where the language serves a purpose within a cultural or social context. The goal is to understand how the language functions as part of a bigger system of meaning, how it shapes relationships and achieves things in the real world.
So understanding the why and how it's used, not just the what.
Exactly. Context gives meaning.
Okay, that makes sense. What's number 2?
Second, learn the language by using it for specific purposes.
Using it for specific purposes. Learning by doing.
That's the heart of it. The research strongly suggests that we develop language ability most effectively through what they call holistic experiences, not by trying to accumulate tiny, isolated bits of knowledge like memorizing a list of verbs today, adjectives tomorrow.
Right, building it piece by tiny piece.
Yeah, that's often less effective than learning through whole tasks. So instead of just drilling verb conjugations in a vacuum, you actively practice using the language to achieve something specific.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Maybe your goal is to learn how to discuss prices during a business negotiation, or speculate about what might have happened in the past during a casual chat, or describe a technical problem to customer support.
So, task-based learning.
Essentially, yes. Use the language right from day one, even with mistakes, to accomplish meaningful, real-world tasks. Your skills develop more naturally, more organically, and more holistically that way.
Learn by doing things you actually want or need to do with the language.
That's the idea. Purpose drives learning.
Okay, context and purpose. What's the third part of the trifecta?
Third, learn the language through face-to-face interaction.
Ah, talking to people.
Talking with people, yes. Now, don't get me wrong. Receptive skills, listening to podcasts like this one, watching movies, reading books, they are absolutely crucial. They provide that vital, comprehensible input we talked about earlier. Yeah. But the research really underscores that the, quote, original home of language learning is in face-to-face conversation.
The original home. I like that.
It's where the real magic often happens. It's in live interaction that you learn to negotiate meaning on the fly when you don't understand something. It's where you get immediate feedback, spoken or unspoken. It's where you have to activate your speaking and listening skills simultaneously and spontaneously.
It's more dynamic, more demanding, maybe.
Definitely more demanding, but also incredibly effective for building real fluency. Why you can and should practice speaking on your own, talking into a mirror, or recording yourself.
It's not the same.
It's not the same as actually engaging with another human being, using the language for genuine communication. That interaction is incredibly powerful. And the good news is, thanks to the internet, finding opportunities to practice interactively is easier than ever. Language exchange partners, online tutors, conversation groups, they're often just a click away, right from your own home.
So leveraging technology to find those interactions.
Absolutely. Make interaction a priority.
Okay, so let's pull that trifecta together. Learn in context, learn by using it for specific purposes, and learn through face-to-face interaction. It really paints a picture of language learning as something active, social, and purposeful.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from just accumulating knowledge about the language
to developing the ability to do things with the language.
Precisely. It's about what you can do in real situations, ideally with other people.
Now, beyond these sort of 3 big pillars from the research, there's also an emphasis on the practicalities, right? The day-to-day stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The studies consistently highlight that effective language learning isn't just about finding the right method. It's about cultivating a consistent daily practice.
Like exercise or learning a musical instrument.
Exactly like that. It requires commitment. It requires fostering your energy, finding ways to stay motivated, and developing that sheer grit, that consistency to keep going even when it feels tough or progress seems slow.
Building the habit.
Building the habit is fundamental. And connected to that, perhaps the most empowering takeaway from all this research is, well, it comes back to what we said near the beginning.
Which was?
The most effective path the one that will really work for you in the long run, will ultimately be the one that deeply resonates with you personally.
Because that's the one you'll stick with.
That's the one you'll stick with. Because you enjoy it, or because it fits your life, or because it aligns with your goals. This means you kind of have to become a researcher of yourself.
A researcher of yourself? How so?
You need to take this academic knowledge, these principles we've been discussing, and actively bridge them with your own unique experiences, your own personality, your own learning preferences, not fixed styles, but preferences.
So trying things out, seeing what works for me specifically.
Exactly. Actively experimenting. Pay attention to what feels effective, what feels enjoyable, what helps you retain information, what keeps you motivated. You need to figure out the best combination for your brain, your lifestyle, your specific reasons for learning.
That puts a lot of agency back on the learner, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just about passively following a method. It's about actively constructing your own best approach.
And a big part of that is being clear on your goals, I imagine.
Huge. The research acknowledges there's a whole spectrum of valid goals. What is it you actually want to achieve?
Like, do you want near native pronunciation? Is that your main aim?
Or maybe your priority is minimizing grammatical errors when you write. Or perhaps it's having a wide vocabulary that just flows effortlessly when you speak.
Or maybe it's more functional, like feeling confident enough to actively participate in a business meeting conducted in English.
Or being able to read complex academic articles in your field. Or just chatting comfortably with native-speaking friends.
All valid but different.
All totally valid goals. But the key is to set goals that are, firstly, clear, and secondly, realistic and achievable for you right now. Don't set yourself up for disappointment by aiming for absolute perfection from day one, if that's just going to make you feel overwhelmed and quit.
So break it down into smaller steps.
Yes, build momentum. And crucially, be willing to take some risks.
Risks, like making mistakes.
Exactly. If you're terrified of making errors, you might avoid speaking altogether. And if you never speak, how will your speaking improve?
Right. You have to be willing to sound imperfect.
You have to embrace imperfection as part of the process. Understand that language learning isn't just some technical skill you master perfectly. It's a journey of continuous improvement, often messy with ups and downs. It's not a race to a flawless finish line, because that line probably doesn't even exist.
That's a really important mindset shift, and it connects to something else mentioned, that this whole journey is more than just learning words and grammar. It's an expansion of perspective.
Yes, this is one of the most profound aspects, I think. The very process of grappling with another language, another way of structuring thought and expressing reality. It inevitably changes you. It forces you to see your own language and culture from the outside, perhaps for the first time. You start to understand your own assumptions, your own cultural biases. It fosters empathy. It literally expands your understanding of what it means to be human, living in this incredibly diverse world with, over 7,000 distinct languages?
Wow, 7,000.
It's an intimate journey of self-discovery wrapped up in learning how to communicate differently.
So it's not just about adding a skill, it's about becoming slightly different yourself.
I think so. It's genuinely one of the most rewarding things a person can do. The process itself, as we've seen, is complex. It's as unique as every single learner. But if you can stay sensitive to your own journey, listen to your intuitions, that gut feeling about what's working for you.
That researcher of yourself idea again.
Exactly. Trusting that intuition, which gets stronger as you gain more knowledge and experience. If you do that, you really can build your language ability. One meaningful experience, one connection, one conversation at a time.
That's a fantastic way to frame it. So that's been our deep dive into the science of language learning. It really hammers home that, yes, there are these powerful, universal principles from the research.
The trifecta: context, purpose, interaction.
Right. But ultimately, your personal journey, discovering what works for you, staying consistent, and being willing to experiment and, yes, make mistakes, that's what's truly paramount. What's the one thing you hope people take away from this?
I'd really love for you listening to take a moment and reflect on how these ideas connect with your own experiences. What have you tried in the past? What worked? What didn't? And maybe most importantly, which approaches actually sparked that sense of enjoyment and made you want to keep going? That's often where the magic lies.
That's great advice, and we genuinely encourage you to share your thoughts, your experiences, your questions with us. If you found this deep dive valuable, if it gave you some food for thought, please do consider liking it, maybe sharing it with a friend who's also on a language learning journey.
And subscribing to the channel always helps us keep bringing you these explorations.
Absolutely. Your support really does make a difference.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Deep Dive. We'll be back again very soon with another topic to get stuck into.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.